I haven't been that active in the different record threads here on YouTube lately because, well, I haven't had much time for it. But the other day I saw a quite nice and interesting thread. I thought, well, why not try to make a video out of this, even though it might become much too long and dreary. It's a bigstar1000, pardon, who made a thread about picking one record with one artist for every letter of the alphabet, and only albums and no compilations. So I thought, well, why not? Of course, since I live in Sweden, we have three more letters in the Swedish alphabet than the, so it's not A to Z here, it's from A to Ö. So, well, let's start and try to hope that this won't take too much of your valuable time. The mix here will be quite a mix, some more famous records and some others that are not so famous, some records that are Swedish too, and at A we'll start with a Swedish prog group called Arbete och Fritid. They have a very nice mix of prog rock and Swedish folk music. This is from 1973, I think, on the MNW label. Their records are quite sought after today, but they are not that very difficult to find though, so I can really recommend it. I don't know whether this actual album is available on CD. It might be, but there are compilations of Arbete och Fritid available. They changed a lot during the years, different people in the group, so also their styles changed a bit. This is from their Swedish folk music inspired period. Right, head on to B. And I could have picked Beatles, I could have picked, well, maybe Beach Boys or so on, but it's a bit, well, people expect you to pick that, so I picked another one, the English group Bonzo Dog Band, The Donut in Granny's Greenhouse. This is a reissue of the Sunset label, but since I have got the original issue, which I think was released on Liberty, but I'm not really sure there. But I know that Sunset reissued lots of material from Liberty. And of course it's Vivian Stanzol, Neil Innes, and all these musical madmen. And it's available on CD, but it's called The Urban Space. I'm the Urban Spaceman there because, well, that's their big hit, and it was added to the songs on this album. It's all available on CD these days. Very good. Okay, O to C. Well, I could have picked anything by Johnny Cash. I could have picked anything with Elvis Costello, but I thought I'd pick some Swedish. And the music you hear in the background is a Swedish group called Cool Candies, and they were active from the early 50s to the, well, early 90s. Well, they changed a bit the members and so on, but their most popular period was between the early 60s up until the mid 70s, and they were very active during the twist movement. And this is, as you can hear, twist music, and it's taken from their first album, Twist Party, on the Ducks label from 1965. It's quite a rare album today because they mainly sold EPs and singles back then. Some years later they had a singer called Sven-Erik Gisborg and became one of the most popular dancing orchestras in the early 70s. Right, Cool Candies, Twist Party, C. Cool organ solo. Okay, D. Well, I thought I'm not going to pick anything by Bob Dylan because that's so obvious. But then I looked through all my records on D, And well, I had to pick something by Bob Dylan anyway, because well, I thought that this is maybe one of the more obvious choices here. Blood on the Tracks from 1975 on the Columbia label. This is a later reissue from well, I bought this new just a couple of years ago. I think it's from 2007, 2008, something. I don't really have to say that much about Blood on the Tracks. It's one of the most famous albums, and Bob Dylan's one of his very best. Okay, E then. Well, I grew up listening a lot to the Dutch group Exception, and I think I may have talked about them here earlier. So I thought, well, I think I showed you their first album, but I'm now going to show you their fifth and best, and also the most famous one, because I think it's the one who sold best too. Exception 5 on Philips from 1972, and I think this was one of the albums, or Exception was one of the first groups that made me listen and take notice to classical music, because many of their songs are jazzy adaptations of classical music pieces. Okay. Right then, F. Well, I could have picked a lot of different things here, but well, I may have talked about this album earlier, but this is also one of the records that were around when I was a kid. It's Roberta Flack's Killing Me Softly. Well, it's not rare, and it's very famous, but I keep coming back to this one all the time. I really like this album. There's not a bad track on it. I think the worst track is actually the title to Killing Me Softly. Right. F, what's that? Well, G then. Then I thought I'd pick one of our most famous modern classical composers and film scores composers, Philip Glass. This is a song cycle called Songs from Liquid Days, and it's sometimes Philip Glass may be a bit repetitive to listen to, but this is a very inspired song cycle, and it's easy accessible to, with vocals by Bernard Fowler, Janis Pendavis, Linda Ronstadt and the Roches. And the songs are very good, with lyrics by Paul Simon, Suzanne Vega and David Byrne and Laurie Anderson. So I like this very much. And this was released on CBS, the CBS label. Roberta Flack was on the Atlantic. These things are important, can't forget them. Well, H. Well, going back to Sweden, the most commercially successful prog group in Sweden during the 1970s was a band called Hoola Bandoola Band, and I have picked their second album, Vem kan man lita på, because it's the most, their best album. I think it's sold most, and I think the level of the tunes, the quality of the songwriting is best at this album. It was released on MNW in 1972. Well, here's a record I don't think many record collectors talk that much about, nor an artist that many of them are so keen about, although I know that there's an enthusiast for this artist that has actually written a book about him lately. The singer is called, or was called, Pierre Isaksson, and he was a bass singer and songwriter. He had his breakthrough in the folk pop group Country 4, and later was a member of the group Family 4, who competed in the Eurovision Song Contest a couple of times for Sweden. But he later signed a record deal with Polydor and made 4 solo albums. This is his third solo album. It's called Hemma. And the reason why this record is a bit special to me, well, not just that I think that it's a very good record and he's a very underrated artist, but it's also one of my grandmother's favorite records. She had it too in her collection, and whenever I listen to this, I get back to my childhood, and it's a nice, very nice feeling. Pierre Isaksson died, unfortunately, just when he was about to make some sort of comeback in 1994. He died in the horrible Estonia tragedy. He was a performing artist on that ship. Okay, we'll stay in Sweden for a while, and here we have a Swedish group called Jailbird Singers, who made this album on Metronome, Tjuvballader och barnatro, in 1964, I think. They're very good, hootenanny folk music group. And these three, they were jailbirds. They were prisoned. They were in prison when they recorded this. And I read that they were heavily guarded while recording. Only one of the members are still alive today, and their lead singer and, leader, Tony Granqvist. Very sadly, just shortly before this, or after this record was released, he died very young in illness. I don't recall what it was now, but they could have become very big, this group. And this is a very popular record in Sweden even now, today. Right? Jailbird Singers. Alright, we'll stay in Sweden. I think I've talked about the Swedish prog group Kebnekaise before, so I think I'd show you this. It's their second album, and the album where they found their style, their folk music, rock and roll style, and it's a very good album. And they still play together, and they released another album just a couple of months ago, and that was very good too. This was released on the label Silence, which there were there were many Swedish popular labels during the 1970s that focused on prog music. NW was one of them, Silence was the other. They were the two big ones. This was released on Silence in 1973. Okay. I showed you Exception before. I'm quite keen when they try to mix classical music with other music styles. And on L we have one of the first examples of that being done in a commercially successful way. It's Jacques Lussier and his trio. And this is the first Playback album, Playback #1. I think there were 5 made. Well, he's made several albums since then, and I think he's still active. I saw him a couple of years ago on television anyway, and I know he's been releasing new records on CD on the Tellart label. This was released on the Decca label. I'm not sure whether this is the first issue, or I don't think so. I think it's a later issue. Playback #1, Jacques Lussier Trio. Okay. On M, I picked Van Morrison. This is maybe a bit of a obvious choice too. A very famous record that I like very much, Moondance. It's my favorite album with Van Morrison of those I've heard. I haven't heard all of his albums, but I keep coming back to this one, Moondance, on Warner Brothers from 1970. M. Well, this is too quite a famous album, but I think it's not very long, but it's very perfect in many ways. It's Randy Newman, Sail Away, released on Reprise in 1972. I love Randy Newman's songs, and this is my favorite album with him. Okay, I had a bit of problems finding something suitable on O, but then, of course, this is also a very obvious choice. O, Mike Oldfield, Tubular Bells. I don't know how many times he has re-recorded and reissued this, but this is the original issue on Virgin from 1973. Over to a group that meant quite a lot to me when I was a teenager, because, well, during the 80s there were lots of synthesizer everywhere, Lindrums and anything, and I thought it sounded awful, so I never really listened to the pop music of the 80s. But then, during the latter part of the 80s, it became popular with bringing in acoustical instruments again, and one main example is the Irish group the Pogues, and this is my favorite album with them, If I Should Fall with Grace, If I Should Fall from Grace with God, from 1988 on the Pogue Mahone label. A record that made me listen a lot to Irish music and liking Irish music. Also, Shane MacGowan was a songwriting genius. P. Well, Q. The obvious choice would be to pick anything by Queen, because, well, I'm a great Queen fan. And then, well, I had some other options on Q. Another Queen, actually, but not Queen Freddie, but Queen Ida, the Zydeco Queen, who was very popular here in Sweden in the early 80s, late 70s. This is a live album. Queen Ida and the Bonetown Zydeco band on tour featuring Al Rapone. It was released in 1981 on the Sonnet label here, and it's a record that you get happy just listening to it. It's wonderful. Queen Ida. Q. Well, we're getting somewhere. R. I talked about Philip Glass before, and when I found that album, Songs from Liquid Days, I first heard of the Roches, three girls singing in harmony. They're quirky songs. I like quirky songs, and this is their first album, and in my view their best album, the Roches. Warner Brothers, 1979. That's my pick for R. I could have picked something by Rolling Stones as well, you know, but I think Roches. Okay, now over to one of the hardest letters to pick something. It's S. And I checked my Excel file where I've written up all my records in my collection, and I have 7 different titles on the letter S. So I could have picked anything by Paul Simon. Could have picked. There are so many different artists that I could have picked something from, but finally I decided to bring out one of my songwriting favorites of later years, Ron Sexsmith, and this is one of the few vinyl albums I have with him. It's Time Being from 2006. It's a promo issue on the Copper Tree label, and I like Ron Sexsmith. I love his songs. I found out about his songwriting in the late 90s, and I really was blown away. Oh God, he's writing the kind of songs I would like to be able to write. Okay, so Ron Sexsmith. Right there. I had to switch side now on the LP. I've been talking so much, and I had to put on the flip side of the Cool Candies album. Well, anyway, that was S. Time for T. And, well, T. Got coffee. But letter T. And, well, I'm playing Cool Candies now in the background. But I thought on T I'd pick another Swedish group that were in the bit pop, a bit dance orchestra, bit with some jazzy influences. That group was called the Telstars. And this is their first album, the Telstars, playing pop jazz on the Nashville record label from 1965. And this was a very musical group with organ player Kjell Öhman and trumpet player Gösta Nilsson. Am I mixing them up? No. Roffe Beckman on saxophone, Douglas West on drums, Marcus Österdahl bass. All these were to become great stars in Swedish music. Sorry. And yeah, very good group, the Telstars. They also played in the same TV show as, they were the house band in a TV show in Sweden called Drop In, where Beatles made one of their early television performances. So they have stood behind the Beatles while they were playing. Okay, T, what's that? U, well, now we're getting some problems, because problems, not trouble. Troubles and problems. That's problems. Well, first of all, I don't have anything by YouTube, so I can't pick anything by YouTube. I've got very few records on you. But finally, I managed to find this one, and it's a quite good album by a fairly okay artist. Is a French singer called Joëlle Ursule, and this is her album called Black French. It's from 1990 on CBS, and it may be a bit interesting for record collectors, because she sang this song White and Black Blues for France in the Eurovision Song Contest, and that was one of the last projects of Serge Gainsbourg before he passed away. Might even be in his very last project. She looks good, and the music is quite nice to listen to, even though, well, maybe I've heard better singers than Joëlle Ursule. She has a bit of weak voice, but it's a pleasant record, and one of my few alternatives on the letter U. Okay, V. Now we're going to Switzerland, to Andreas Vollenweider, the harpist and multi-instrumentalist. I heard about him first time in the mid-80s when he had this. He released a couple of records that sold quite well for CBS. This is from 1991 on the Columbia label, but to be quite honest, you can easily get a bit fed up with all the harp playing on Vollenweider's records. It's very nice, but it's in small doses. But this record is a bit different than his other records, because it's much more orchestrated with different kinds of instruments and musical styles and sound effects and some really strange singing. But I've been listening a lot to this. It's very good music, and it's interesting music. We're soon getting to the end of the alphabet. W, well, I thought I'd pick one of my favorites, Josh White, who was very popular in Sweden in the 50s and 60s. And this is an early album that I found some years ago on Elektra, even with the original Elektra label. I think it's from 1955, the white Elektra label. The story of John Henry, a musical narrative. Also ballads, blues and other songs. Josh White, great singer, great interpreter of old songs. Songster, I think it's called. Josh White. W. X. Well, I have to say I don't have anything on X, unless I count the Exceptions albums, but that would be cheating. So, sorry, I have to skip X. Y. Well, then we run into trouble again because I don't have that much. I don't have that much on Y. Very few records, but well, I could show you this one. It's Weird Al Yankovic, Polka Party. Maybe not one of my favorite records, although I like Weird Al Yankovic's view on making fun of music and that sense of comedy. But, well, why? Weird Al Yankovic, Polka Party, released on the Rock and Roll Records label in 1986. Z. Well, could have picked an album by Monica Zetterlund, of course, but I haven't got her most famous album on the LP, Waltz for Debbie. That's the one that I would pick. I haven't got that on LP, just CD, and I'm sticking to LP this time. So, I'm going to show you another Swedish artist, Finn Zetterholm, and the Cabaret Orchestra, with his album Längtans blåa elefant, an album from 1977 on the YTF label. The Cabaret Orchestra was a very good band, and I like Finn Zetterholm's songs very much. Alright, Z. Okay. If this was in England or most other countries, we'd be at the end of this video now, because, well, after Z, not much more, but we have 3 more letters in Sweden. O, Ä, and Ö. And, well, to others it may just look like different variations of A and O with different umlauts, but they are regular letters in the Swedish alphabet. And let's start with O. And I haven't got that much with on O, I have to say that. But there's another Swedish singer, folk singer, called Fred Åkerström, very good interpreter of other songwriters. And I picked his album Mera Ruben Nilsson, which is his second album with songs by Ruben Nilsson. It's from 1971 on the Metronome label. Fred Åkerström. Okay, here we have a problem with the Ä letter, because I haven't got anything on Ä, not a sausage. So the last record I will show you is on Ö, and I'm going to show you an album with the Swedish jazz pianist player Rune Överman and his trio, and he made several good albums, but this is one of my favorites. It's Bad Boys from Brazil on the Amigo label. It's a record from 1987, and he's made this together with the bass player Luisao and the drummer Fernando Pereira, so it's very Brazilian and very listenable in many senses. Also, the wonderful accordion player and jazz genius Sivuka joins him on one of the tracks, so great album. So, well, that's that. From A to Ö by me. Bye bye.